Welcome, team, to the inaugural episode of the First Drafts podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Weber, and my first guest that I'm very honored and excited to have here today is Nicole Krupela of Krupela Copy Studio. She's also like my bestie, and a colleague, a friend, and now a mini host. Yes. So the first thing I wanted to talk about today is how you and I met, which this is like an accidental plug, sort of, is Mark Spiewak. You're probably going to hear that a lot on the podcast because he's introduced me to like a lot of people.
Yep.
So Mark connected us, God, I'm trying to think of how long it is.
It was 2 years ago at least.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm hosting my Thrive Co. water glass for this reason.
Yes.
Thank you, by the way.
Oh, yeah,
for having me on the pod. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yes, Mark Spiewak.
Mark Spiewak connected us through Thrive Co. originally. So I remember being in the boardroom. I guess you could call it a boardroom at Thrive Co.
And Thrive Co. is a co-working space.
Yeah, Thrive Co. is a co-working space in Clayton. I had gone there through Mark Spiewak, and then he was getting his websites reestablished. And he's like, "You've got to meet this girl, Nicole." And I was like, "Okay, let's see." There's a lot of people, you know, and when you're connecting, you never know, like, is this going to work out or is
this
it not?
worth my time?
Yes, exactly. So you had actually come by. That's when I remember like meeting you. You came by the boardroom and you're like, "Hi, I'm just going to come in and pop in."
Yes,
do you remember that?
I do remember this.
Okay.
Yes, and Katie Silversmith, the founder of Thrive Co., also had reached out to me separately and said, "I think you and this Melissa Weber girl would really get along." And so just through this whole community, it was bound to happen. I ran into you in person, but this was sort of midway through COVID. Everybody was in masks, kind of getting into their office, closing the door, getting out. So there wasn't a lot of like organic meeting of people.
Right. Yeah.
So I saw you. I knew it was you because you were with Mark, and it made sense contextually in my head. I'm like, that must be Melissa. And so I just ran up.
I know.
So
Like a
crazy person.
No, it's like just weird because I can remember it and just like. It's like your first impression of somebody, but then now I'm like, oh my God, that's so Nicole.
Right. Hi. You're like, I could see you do that to other people.
Right. Yes. Yes. Hilarious. So anyway, shout out to Mark Spiewak, Training, Spiewak Racing.
Yep.
And Thrive Co. Katie Silversmith. She's hopeful. I'm hopeful she'll be a podcast guest here in the next few months.
Great.
So that's how we met. We've since collaborated in a number of ways, but she's helping with our First Drafts website. We have a lot of First Drafts things coming down the pipeline, so we're really excited about that.
Yeah.
So Nicole owns her own copy studio. So tell us a little bit about that, and what you do, and what services you offer, and what your passion is.
Yeah, so if you're in the marketing world at all, you know what copywriting is. If you're not, you probably think I'm talking about legal copyrights and trademarking.
Oh, yeah, right.
And so I'm always like kind of gauging my audience when I talk about what I do. But I'm a writer, basically. We call it copywriting. It's an old advertising term, but I've been a writer for almost 10 years. I went to school for writing, and I started with creative writing and then found my way into marketing. And now I'm on my own. So I opened my business in 2018. And back then I was really more of a ghostwriter. I was white labeling everything. I didn't want to be front and center. Yeah. Mark gives me a lot of trouble about how I don't like talking about myself, but I don't. I mean, I've gotten more used to it because I have to. But recently I've decided that, you know what, I'm going to lean in to standing up my business and making it, more fully realized and branded. And so Krupela Copy Studio, it's my last name, my married name, is a studio that you can engage for any kind of writing needs that you have as a business. So I work with nonprofits and regular old businesses, mostly small businesses, on website copy, brochure copy, email copy, social copy, whatever you need, anything that your business could need as far as writing is concerned, I can handle it.
Love that.
There's our UPS guy.
Hey, UPS guy. Cameo. I wish we could get him and be like,
oh, I know.
So, you want to be on the pod, bro?
I was going to say, sometimes they want this.
All right, well.
They like cutting through to go.
You never know what's going to happen on the first draft.
Never know.
Okay, great.
So,
that's great.
That's what I do.
Love that.
Yep.
And that, I think, is a good segue into... So we, originally, I guess we're more colleagues and then have become really close friends. Mm-hmm. So we've had a lot of very interesting discussions about life and about business and about kind of the mindset required for going out on your own. Mm-hmm. So the topic of today's podcast episode is shoulds and freeing the zoo animals. And this is important topics because they go together. But the mindset that somebody going out on their own to either become self-employed or to be an entrepreneur, freelancer, a small business owner, any of these people, you have to learn how to be misunderstood. So I think that segues in. The shoulds conversation came to me through like a therapy session where we label what we think that we should be doing. In corporate, we believe that we should have a job, you come out of college and do all these things.
Yep.
So you kind of end up in this caged environment. So what was the first time? Because I learned about this like thought process of like freeing the zoo animals from you originally, I believe. And so I just wanted to hear more about like how you kind of found out about it.
Where did it come from?
Where did it come from, the concept generally, and your kind of experience with like that kind of lifestyle, I guess.
Yeah. So first off, the short answer is it came from my brain. And it was one of those sort of half-baked ideas that just I like ended up thinking on for a long time. We've like brought it up in context of our lives a lot.
Yes.
So basically, kind of what Melissa was alluding to earlier, like when you take the jump into freelance, presuming you're jumping from a more traditional sort of 9-to-5 employer job, you're, a W-2 employee at a company, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And in fact, it's very stable.
Yeah, right.
Very low risk. And the reality is that as an employee, you have no risk relatively. Right. You have a lot of rights and you have a lot of protection around yourself should the business fail or should you fail in some capacity or should there be a medical event and this, that, and the other thing. And so when people talk about going into or jumping into the unknown of freelance, what they're really saying is you're taking on a lot of personal risk.
Right.
And so kind of going back to the comment of freeing the zoo animals, you and I were sitting on a patio drinking a glass of wine with another colleague of ours. And we were talking about how once you do figure out how to build in safety nets around your freelance career, you start sometimes thinking that you want to go and free the proverbial zoo animals that are not freelancers. And it's funny because first of all, it takes a lot to make that transition. Second of all, it's really just an idea because I don't think like when I was working full-time for a company, I didn't think of myself as a zoo animal.
No.
I still wouldn't.
Yes, right.
But it's like this urge. What I was talking about was the urge.
Yes.
It's the same urge I get actually when I go to the zoo. And that's probably where this came from.
Yes.
I always look at the animals and I'm like, are you living your best life? Some of them are.
Right.
Some of them might not be. Right.
Right. Exactly.
And we're not here to play God, obviously.
No. Yeah.
But I had just kind of said that because I think it's what I do in my life is I tend to educate people about the options that are out there.
Exactly.
And that's where this kind of all comes full circle is, we're here, you and I are here to talk about the difference between freedom and personal freedom and the systems that we are most accustomed to culturally that have been around relatively the longest to our lives.
Right.
And how those systems are changing dramatically. I mean, I think we were having this conversation as so much was changing
100%
during the pandemic. So.
Yes. And that's what I think is like, because I was saying this to another friend colleague, is that I didn't want this topic to come off as like, you guys are zoo animals and we're the free ones.
Right.
But it is like when because I was like, that's not the point. Like, this is not meant to be like a condescending conversation. But I think that when I had a corporate job for a long time and I came out of that corporate job was there, well, between 2 jobs, 8 years. And then I was like miserable, wanting to get literally in a glass box, you know, in your office. And you're just like, oh my God, how do I get out of here?
Yep.
But there are no other options is what you're convinced by, is that you went to college, you got a good job, and now that's what you should be doing, you know?
Why would you leave it?
Why would you leave it? This is stable. And there's the urge, and you're just like, I could do this, right? But when you don't have a lot of other people to see how they're doing it or how they're navigating, like making money and getting insurance and, you know, how do I get sales and all these different things, you start to be like, oh, it's just impossible, or nobody does that.
Right.
So
I could never do that.
Yeah, I could never do that. So I feel like freeing the zoo animals is a very like, it's like a secret that you find out that you just want to tell everybody about.
Yes.
You know, it's like a religion.
I've been saved. Because I think I was, you know, it came from me talking about myself. Like when I got out of my job that back in 2018, I had a job that was very toxic for me.
Sure.
So this is, you know, just so everybody kind of understands my personal history. I actually had a lot of risk that I didn't even realize was there, because I entered into that job supposing that it would have the same sort of environment and safeguard around it as my previous one did, which I left happily, and it was a very great experience. My first job out of college. My second job was not. And I learned that to some extent, like, that safety net is, it requires like this agreement, this unspoken agreement between the company and myself. And it was a startup. So for me, you know, I was shocked that this startup did not like adhere to basic ethical values, like basic normal systems. But getting out of it, there's this moment of like, well, I didn't know that stuff was out there. Granted, you know, I have the privilege of being a white woman. And I do come from like a communications background. And so I was able to sell myself quickly. I'm naturally outgoing. There was a lot that was going for me. But that said, you know, there's also a lot of skills that you can learn if this is something that you want to pursue.
100%.
And that's what I'm so passionate about, like in this life. And I know you are.
Exactly. Too. And that's what I feel like I want people to know, that there are options that probably align with their desires more than they know, you know, or they see people doing it, but they have no thought of like that it's accessible to them. You know, it's like, well, she's a business person, so of course that makes sense for her. Like, she could do it and figure it out. But what we hope to create is like a guiding post for people that are able to do that. Again, should they desire. Desire is a whole other topic on the podcast and another time and place, but
it's something we talk about a lot.
It's something we do talk about a lot. And I think that when you're like going into the shoulds too, is kind of like, there's a whole fallacy of people call it a sunk cost fallacy, which is, I went to college and got this degree, and if I don't use it, then, you know, it's a waste.
By the way, I learned what a sunk cost was like 2 years ago.
Yeah. No, you're obsessed with
for a little while. I applied it to everything. I'm like, that's a sunk cost.
It really is. But it like, you don't realize how much, like, it's a business term, you know, of like not making future forward-looking decisions based on a sunk cost just because you made that investment. Just like get over it and move on with your life. But in your real life, that's true too, of like, I invested time and money and energy in this degree that's no longer serving me, but I should just keep utilizing it because, you know, that's what people would tell me to do. So it's an interesting balance of shoulds and desires.
Well, and I think there's something there that is so typically American too, getting the most out of every bit of investment that you make in something versus understanding that there is this invisible value that is opening doors around you all the time because of the decisions that you make on a daily, regular basis, showing up in life, having conversations, being open, whatever it is. I think we tend to devalue those things and place a really heavy emphasis on traditional school and education, these things that we paid this dollar amount for. So you better be making this dollar amount in this many years to reap the rewards of that investment. A lot of times just like having to let go of that thought process can be very helpful for opening up new opportunities.
Yes. I think it's undervaluing just experience in general. Like, can I accept that I'm going to go into a situation and have an experience.
Yes.
And have no idea how that's going to help me, not help me, pay off in any short or long-term version. But like knowing that the trade-off is worth the, like just experiencing it.
Yes.
Yeah, which is what's scary to people because that's, you know, then you have to deal with all the feelings and thoughts that come from the experience. And then that's like, oh, the man in the mirror.
Right.
And then you got to free yourself. So that turns into, you know, a whole other decision-making process.
Definitely.
But okay, so the question for the team. So questions for the team are just a question that is applicable to either or me and the guest who is on the podcast. So the question I was thinking of was, when did you start to feel free? So you freed yourself from the zoo. Is there any moment specifically, or is there any time where you were just like, and it could be a collection of times, I think that happens to me, but like a moment where you're just like, oh, okay, this was so worth it.
Yeah. So my story is, everybody's story is different. Mine's a little different as far as my like kind of journey into self-employment. I had been working with a woman named Lindsay Skridensky. She's married now, but back then Lindsay Van Quatham.
Yep.
And she had, a year prior to us meeting, started her own agency for nonprofit communications. And she had a team of people across the city helping her. But she also was, I mean, she was carrying this company on her shoulders and doing a phenomenal job, but it was exhausting her. Yeah. And I ended up hiring her off a recommendation of one of my colleagues at the time when I was working at the startup to host events and panels that brought leaders in St. Louis together to discuss things like, you know, women in tech and overcoming barriers and things like that, which is super ironic considering the way I was let go from the startup. Yeah. That's a story for another time. So in any case, Lindsay, when I was let go out of nowhere from the startup, she and I had a meeting that day. And I remember there was a moment where I was sitting at home and I decided to go to the meeting instead of wallow on the couch. I really wanted to wallow. I really wanted to just like call my parents and cry. Yeah, right. My inner child was having a horrible meltdown. But I pulled it together and I went to this meeting because it was celebrating the end of a really successful panel event that we had done we had the CIO of Nestle Purina there and she was amazing and wanted to support, and we made great connections. And so I went there and I, you know, as professionally as I could, told them kind of what happened and kept it really like high level. Sure. I think Lindsay read between the lines because she had seen the issues that I was experiencing at that startup. Right. And so after everybody had left, she kind of took me outside and she asked me if I wanted to be her second at her agency and scale the agency. And that was, I mean, I wanted to cry from relief and just from kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Like, this is what happens when you invest in like relationships. I adored her and still do, but at the time I was like, this is somebody that I definitely could work with. Yeah. And so I felt free from that moment. I honestly felt like I had found somebody who was so selfless and so much more the manager and the leader that I wanted to follow better than anybody I had worked with before. And I knew that that was, you know, God, the universe, whatever you believe in, telling me, here's the door. Green light. Go for it. You know, it's open for you. And so, I mean, from there, I just like every day kind of had this attitude of gratitude. Yeah. And I always reminded myself that, you know, it could have been so much worse. Yeah. And I think that's a really good point of like relationship building. And I guess it kind of goes into the thought of, don't burn bridges is kind of a good point, but I think it's even if on the opposite end of that, it's more like who do you connect with in your life and in business, and knowing like talk about sunk cost. It's kind of like the opposite of that is like how can you invest in things when you're not where you want to be yet, but that could potentially like come back and be that freedom thing. Right. That, you know, it's kind of like the antidote to the sunk feeling. It's true. Of like, oh, I just invested all this time and energy. It's like, yeah, but you're also reinvesting as you're going. Yes. If you appropriately know where you want to go. Right. You know. Right. One piece of advice that somebody gave me about job interviews is that when you're interviewing for a new job, people want to like linger on their past. Like the urge is to say, I went to school and then I did this and then I did this and then I did this and then I did this. And now I'm here talking to you.
Right.
And while that makes sense logically, what is more compelling for the interviewer is to say, I have a background in these things. I am here now. I want to be there tomorrow.
Yes, I love that. I love it because it's like the vision, people can't adopt your vision if you don't know the vision, you know, and knowing the vision is really hard. It's very hard work, especially depending on what you want to do. But that's really good advice because I think that is 100% more compelling. And it gives the opportunity to have a conversation as opposed to like interviewing because then you just ask questions and then it's like a conversation and it feels really different.
Right.
Yeah. And then, I mean, especially from a leadership perspective, I think that's important, like to show that you have a vision of something. So,
well, and it emphasizes your point that, you know, keeping that forward momentum is important for your own mental health and for your business success.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Well, I love that so much.
Yeah.
I know. That's something like, I get little blips of it. I started my path like right before COVID. So it's been a little bit of a rockier road as far as like, oh my God, I feel great, you know, and that could be true for anybody, no matter what time of, you know, your life or the world state that things are happening. But,
when did you first feel free?
I think it's like the moments where I'm, number one, don't know what day it is. Makes me feel free because you're so rich. It's like the Sunday Scaries.
Yes.
And
oh my gosh, that's a huge one.
Oh my God. It's like I don't think people realize how bad it is for your health about like this underlying anxiety and this underlying like, I have to go do things I hate. And there's a lot of people that don't hate their jobs, but they don't love them or it still affects their bodies. And so I have struggles with anxiety. It was a lot worse back then. It's a lot better now. But it's like not caring or knowing what day of the week it is. And so there would be moments where I'm like, oh, what day is it? And then I'm like, oh, I'm running.
Right.
You know, and at 2:00 on a Wednesday.
Right.
This is what I imagined, you know, is like being able to dictate your own time and your own schedule.
Yeah.
And so those kind of like moments are great. There's also moments when things are really, really, really hard that I'm like, why do I do this? You know?
Definitely.
But then I'm like sitting there and I'm like, no, you're a little baddie. You know, like you're creating your future. And what's the alternative? The alternative is I'm in the exact same spot, but in an office.
Right.
Like hating what I'm doing and hating what I'm working for.
Yes.
It's an exchange for your life. So it's like knowing that I don't have to do that anymore and I just have a different kind of problems. Like what kind of problems do you want?
Right.
And the problems that I want are the ones I have now.
Another point I wanted to bring up is that like you and I right now are kind of having this conversation about polar opposites.
Yeah.
Right? Like the quintessential 9 to 5, 8 to 5.
Right.
Really at the end of the day, depending on the pressure of the people that you work with. 8, 9 to 5, sort of soulless, like corporate gray office.
Yeah.
That was not our most productive environment.
Yes.
For work, right?
Right.
And there was a lot in there. I think that's what made me think of the zoo because the zoo, just as like an extended metaphor, like the zoo is what we as people think is like a great sort of simulated environment for these animals to thrive.
Right.
Right. And I think in many ways, like the office, the workplace is something that we as humans are continually redefining to try to find the right mix and match of components, you know?
Right.
Like I really respect people in, you know, the HR industry and like the people management industry. Or if you're just a manager in general and you care about your people. You know, I've had a lot of people that I've worked with on the client side that work really, really hard to promote flexibility in your day-to-day.
Right.
And so, you know, freelance is not the only way to gain these
that's
freedoms.
a great point. Yeah, that's a really great point because I feel like the culture I certainly did grow up in, and especially people in the generation above mine, which is primarily older millennials and Gen Xers, is like you go to a corporate office and that's just the rule, but it feels very controlling and it feels very stifling. And again, like you're saying with the zoo example, is like, this is the greatest thing for everybody. And it's like, what I think somebody could gather from this who isn't aiming to be self-employed or freelancing is like, we're now living in a different world where we can request or demand hybrid environments or whatever. And that's a way to free yourself. That's like you're saying, it's a way to get out of the thing that's causing probably harm to your body, number one, but also just hopefully improving your work,
right? No
matter what. And that could keep you in a job for a lot longer that you can still learn from and get skills from that you might have left earlier had you not kind of pressed for those things.
Well, and that's what I think is one of the biggest tragedies, is that good companies are losing good people because the environment is wrong.
Right.
And it's not the fault of necessarily like the company's practices or the mission or the fit with this person. All of those things could be great.
Right.
But if the environment is wrong
and
the environment isn't built to, encourage the employee and the employer to flourish together, then the system breaks down.
Yes.
And it's also challenging because there is no one size fits all solution.
Right.
And I think we're seeing that now with hybrid, sort of remote setups. People can opt in, and that choice to say, I want this, is way more powerful than the opposite of somebody saying, well, you should want this.
Right. You should. And that's a really good, this is a little off the grid, but talking about shoulds is, and I always have this really interesting thought process of like bosses and leadership believing that they know or dictating I use the word desire a lot, but like the incentive that the employee wants.
Yes.
Like you're dictating, I give you money, so you should do this for me. A lot of people don't really care that much about money. And that's like,
benefits.
Exactly. Like what do they desire? Like, is it, this is a random story, but I remember in my MBA classes, it was like I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but it was like an operations class. I like operations a lot, so it was very interesting. But they had it was a company that puts those little, it's not toys, but it's like pamphlets into cereal boxes.
Oh my!
That was the company.
Oh wow!
Yes.
That is niche.
Yeah. That's what they did.
Very specific.
So they had, so they had to, you got to put it in like a thing.
Right, protect it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they got this huge contract, and they had X amount of days to get the contract done. But there were so many boxes that the guy was like, how in the world am I going to get this done in the amount of time that we need it? Because people were getting paid by the hour, and they were rolling or doing whatever, sticking it in, going. They had to be there. They were required to be there. Why are they going to go faster?
Yeah, right.
You have to be there.
Right.
I'm not going to work harder for, you get more output in this amount of time.
Right.
So what he did was say how many, boxes would each person have to complete in order for us to get this on time. He gave them the number, and he was like, when you get this done, you can leave, and then we'll pay you for the whole day.
Beautiful.
And it was done.
Time.
It was just time. That was what they wanted.
Yep.
Without sacrificing money. Right. You get time back. You're making the same amount. And I got my goal met with this contractor who's hopefully going to give me more money again.
That was actually one of my first aha moments when I went self-employed is I realized that it no longer mattered, how I should say, it didn't matter that I worked a certain number of hours per week anymore. What did matter was that I delivered on these certain valuable services.
Yeah. Right.
Deliver on deliverables. Yes. Yeah. Services, products.
Yeah.
So, and that's so important as a creative because there are days where I can just feel the creative energy flowing through my fingertips and I get something done in an hour. And there are days where literally the same task can take me 8 hours.
Right.
And granted, I have to control for that. Right?
Yeah. Like, account for things that are going to go wrong. Yeah.
Right. But there does need to be a range. And those tasks can't always be perfectly cut and cornered like you can a physical product.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Service industries are a whole other game. And I don't think and there's so many services now. and industries in the service world, and that turns into a scaling conversation. But it's like you can't scale, you can't scale creativity. You know, when you want the organic creation, it's not something that you can rush. But people again like to control things. You know, and they're like, well, you should be able to. So the should for me came from therapy when I found out I was a perfectionist.
When you were diagnosed.
I was diagnosed. And then I came out of it and I was telling people this and they're like, well, duh, we knew that. And I'm like, I didn't, because I thought perfectionists did everything perfectly. I was like, I was a perfectionist about perfectionism.
Right, sure.
You know, I was like, they do it perfectly.
Hilarious. Yeah,
I'm like, well, I don't ever do anything perfectly. Like I want to, but it's like, it's never perfect.
The irony is.
Oh my God, it was sick. And I was like, oh my gosh. So Kent, shout out to Kent. The therapist, I guess he heard me say should a lot. And he's like, yeah, you got a problem. And I was like,
you've got a should problem.
You got a should problem. Yeah, you're shooting all over yourself. That's a that's a piece. We'll shout out Curse Coffee for that one.
Yes.
But that, I think, when you realize how much you're trying to control something,
the grip that
it strangles everything.
Yes.
And so leaders, I think, have this vision of something, but they're not realizing that not everybody is benefiting from that vision. You know, they're benefiting from the job or thing that you're doing, and you have to put yourself in their position in order for this to make sense for them. So hopefully leaders can, big on leadership. I really hope that we can create some spaces for leaders to learn from each other, but also understand that the leader partner, I prefer to call them partners or employees. It really is more of a partnership than a pure, I give you money in exchange for the things that I want. You know, and that's the contract. It's just this money.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, shoulds, in my view, represent these unspoken expectations.
Yes, love that. Okay.
And that is where everybody gets themselves into trouble. Because if you have an expectation in your head and you're not communicating it to the person that you want something from, you can't expect that person to read your mind.
Right.
Likewise, if somebody is expecting something of you, but you don't have ultimate clarity on what that expectation is, then you might be serving any number of supposed expectations, and the energy output is so high that it exhausts both parties.
Right.
And, you know, as a communications person, as a writer, it drives me absolutely crazy because it's really not that hard to describe what you need and articulate it clearly. Right. People are afraid to be too simple and and just stop talking. Yeah. I want this, full stop. Yeah. Can you do this, full stop? Right?
Yes. It was, I'm not going to bring up the person's name because I don't
We don't need that juju.
Person. We don't need that juju, but he did say something that was really great that I think about a lot, is that awkwardness is the cost of clarity.
Yes.
And that is so true. Is like, and that's true for all kinds of relationships, is that like I have to have an awkward, uncomfortable for like 2 seconds conversation in order for us to get on the same page about what we're agreeing to. Because they're false agreements. You think that this one way and it's not. So yeah, I think that that's probably a big cultural shift that'll have to happen as far as business goes, because it is so ingrained that it's just the trade-off of the money. But yeah, we'll see how it goes, I guess.
Yeah, and that becomes super apparent in the freelance world because you are in the business of setting expectations for your client as far as what the creative process will look like. Right. At least, I'm sorry, when I say freelance, I should say like creative freelance work. So,
yeah, right.
So like I'll give you an example for me. I have been working with websites for many years now. I've designed them, I've strategized content for them, and I've written content for them. I've created images for them. I've done everything for them. And it took me a long time to realize that everybody has a different understanding of what a website is, what it's supposed to do. I was operating more from a very practical standpoint, but people feel very emotionally about their websites. And they might see a website out in the world that inspires them, and they now want that level of service, but they don't understand what it takes to get there. Right. There's any number of examples. Yeah. Right. In the freelance world. Yep. And so, you know, I remember working with Lindsay, and we had times where we would get off a call and be like, okay, I think I know what they want.
Yeah.
Should we do this? Should we do that? Should we, I'm thinking that we should give them, I don't know, 5 blog posts and 10 pages, and that should be enough for them, don't you think?
Right.
Doesn't matter what we think.
Right.
It only matters what that client expects of you.
Right.
And so we learned the hard way many times that we would deliver something and it didn't live up to expectations.
Right.
And the client, rightfully so, was like, well, why didn't we clarify this in the beginning?
Right.
And then you have to back up and rework and do those things. So you go through this process, that horrible, painful process. So many times you end up working way more and not getting paid for it. But it's your fault at the end of the day. And by fault, I mean, it's your responsibility. I think that's a more positive way to frame it. But.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that it's an appropriate understanding that stuff's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's very first drafts. You got to expect that it's going to be messy, but trying to get your mind in the right space of again, what the desires of the client is, the desires of a market are going to be, the desires of your team. And that's why I always like the phrase, here's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
And you're really good at that. Miles, our friend Miles, he'll be on the podcast as well. He's really good at that. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, real quick, we're going to stop the conversation.
Oh, he has great recaps.
He does have great recaps, and it's good because I'm just like word vomit. And so sometimes he'll say stuff and I'm like, did I say that?
Right. He's like, I have it down right here.
He's like, you just said that. I'm like, well, I guess I did. So, we should address that. So yeah, I think that there's definitely some skills, and that's a good point too, of skills you can learn. That sometimes are more painful than others. Mm-hmm. But if you have good people that have already gone through these kinds of processes, and you can learn from them, that is always a benefit. So,
and it benefits your life too.
Yes,
I mean, you talked about how you learned about this concept in therapy. You didn't learn about it first in business because, it all starts from inside, right? Inside of our minds and how they work. But, in intimate relationships or relationships with your family, having relationships based on I want to do this versus I should do this.
Right.
Changes your life.
It does change your life. And it is awkward sometimes because you have to say things that maybe you weren't expecting to have to say.
I don't want to do this.
I don't want to do that. And I'm like,
why not?
Well, why not?
You always used to want to do that.
I know. You're like, wait, are you changing and growing?
Yeah. You've changed.
You're changed. I'm like, no shit.
I hope so.
Yes, I did. Thank you for noticing.
Yeah.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So on that, okay, so the one thing that I do want to hit before, because we are already going really quick, is... I guess I did include defining your desires. So this is kind of two pieces of this is we'll go deeper into desire because that's a really long topic to dig into separately. Yeah. But I think was there any kind of practice or a time where you really sat down to define desires? And you might have done this multiple times because I know that you probably have. And the process of checking in with yourself. Because I think I have on here, we're talking about the fallacy of enlightenment and perpetuity, which is I find out I'm a perfectionist. I get rid of the word should. I feel I'm free from the corporate world. And now I'm just fixed. And perpetuity. I'm good now. It's absurd. Yeah, right. You're just I did all the hard work.
Enlightenment and perpetuity, meaning that you are forever enlightened now that you know these things.
Yes, and you just stay there, and you stay there every day.
You're floating on a cloud.
You're floating on a cloud, and you don't have to, do anything. So I think, for me, we know that that's bullshit.
Yeah,
so it's so it's great to hit this freedom space. It's kind of my question is what do you do to check in? Because our desires are going to change. What feels free today might feel not free, in a different part of your life, or your desires evolve. And I guess what you do to kind of check in with yourself that you're aligning, your desires with the behavior of your life,
Yeah, so there's this practice in Agile methodology that's a look back. It's a retroactive is what they're called.
Oh, okay.
Retro for short.
Okay.
Shout out to my husband, John, who fills me in on things like this because it applies to his life more than mine, but I think we can learn from it. So It's a practice, and at the end of every big project, anything that you create. So let's use, for example, a website that I built for somebody.
Yeah.
It's really critical at the end of that project to look back. And to look back at, how it was planned out and scoped out. How did we meet the timeline that we initially set for the project? If we didn't, why not?
Sure.
What did we learn about the way we work? What did we learn about the way the client works and how we communicate the work product to the client? Asking the client for feedback, all of those things. And I think, yes, it's helpful for project management and making efficiencies better in the future, but as far as what you desire, I always try to look back and say, how did that feel?
Yeah.
Like, how did that work feel?
Yeah.
Was it stress inducing? Was it, really easy and lovely and enjoyable?
Yeah.
And between those two, like between that spectrum of like great and terrible, where did you land? What made it good? What made it less good? And for me, that helps point me closer to my desires, because what I desire in my life is peace.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds really cheesy.
No,
but,
not at all.
I had a lot of years of my life spent not in peace or at peace at all.
Right.
And so I say more years than not.
Yeah.
So, for me, peace comes from the proper expectations being set, the lack of shoulds, the feeling that I have not overstretched myself and I've promised exactly what I can deliver, if not slightly less, so that I always have that wiggle room and that time to breathe.
Right.
And it comes from working with the right people.
Yeah.
Somebody told me a long time ago, when I was first starting to work as a contractor with Lindsay, at the time, I didn't even think of it as being my own business, but I was. Yeah. And so I started talking to people that have been doing this for a lot longer than I had.
Yeah.
And they said, Nicole, it's not about the clients you work with. It's about the people you work with.
Yeah, right.
So get it out of your head that you want to work with the St. Louis Zoo and you want to work with the White House, whatever it is.
Yeah, right.
Like, if you don't love the person that is the president of those organizations or the person that's working with you, it's not going to make the project enjoyable. You have to like the people.
Right.
So that's what I do. That's how I kind of practice checking in from a work perspective. At least.
For sure. And I think that's a good point too, if you're a new business owner, it's hard to know what you're going to like and what you're not going to like until you're doing it.
You got to do
it. Again, accepting that this is an experience and not worrying about like, well, you have to keep working with this kind of client because I already did that for 3 years or whatever. It's like, no, you don't. You can literally stop it anytime you want. You can change your mind anytime you want.
Yes.
It's a good just thought process in general.
You can change your mind.
You can change your mind anytime you want. Yeah. And so that can be a struggle, I think. I definitely struggle with services just changing. You realize like, I don't enjoy spending my time like this. I feel exhausted because that affects the rest of your life. I mean, if you're exhausted all the time, you're not going to be great to be home, or have time to like go run or do other things that you enjoy. So I really like that, the look back. It's a very quippy little line.
Yeah. Well, you have to know what peace feels like to be able to measure things against it.
Yeah, that's true.
So I would say, like, if you don't even know what you desire, step one is defining that.
Yes.
And making sure that you stay attached to like the understanding what that desire is, even as it ebbs and flows.
Right. Yeah, I think that's good. And I think it's like you're saying, a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And
for me it is.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it is for me too. Like, I know when I'm living in alignment, another energy cord / human design thing that will go down a rabbit hole another time. But I do know that I'm in alignment, even if it's hard and even if it's painful, it's still peaceful. And I always, that's a reference back to like being in a relationship, for me, and then breaking up with the person. And it was painful and hard, but there was so much peace of, that's a good comparison, I feel like, because, when you love something or you love someone, you're just like, well, I'm meant to feel kind of anxious and I'm like, are you? And so when you can feel love in any form and peace, I feel like that's like when you're on the right path.
Definitely.
So, but it's tricky. It's a long, windy road. So if you haven't found that yet, that's okay. And it's again, not perpetuity. Sometimes you are up and sometimes you're down, and life is going to happen and business things are going to happen that you didn't foresee, that are going to end up, requiring look back every now and again. And Yeah, maybe that's something that the First Drafts team will put together, some look back workshops. Which sounds really fun.
You do.
I mean, I want to
go build some off days into your schedule now.
Yes,
so.
Yes, exactly. I really do. Okay, cool. Well, here I feel like we're gonna have to wrap up, which is kind of gnarly. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of finish our little chat on? If any encouragement for somebody who, maybe wants to get out into their own self-employed world, freelance world, small business world.
Yeah.
Or just want to try something new.
Okay, so I have two pieces of advice. One is more emotional, one's more practical. So I'll start with the practical first. There are some really great free resources for entrepreneurs out there that expose you to things like the tax system and how that's different. There are community-based organizations that provide resources. So I would just kind of Google and look around for small business resources. Most places want to see small businesses thrive.
Yeah.
And so I would tap into as many free resources as you can. I personally had a great experience with my tax accountant.
Yeah.
And so he helped me think through a lot of things in the very beginning, and it was for free. I just filed that year, and it's just crazy. So that's number one. I would not shy away from those resources. There's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
About how to protect yourself financially. Emotionally, if you are at a place where you either feel like you're shedding a lot of people and things from your life that no longer serve you, maybe you have a fractured relationship with your family, or maybe you just need a third-party perspective, I think therapy can be a really great tool, especially for the beginning. And I would recommend looking at that as an investment in yourself. Yeah. If it's $100 a session, build that investment into your budget, into your plan for yourself. If you take on new work, take that money out of the new work and put it aside for yourself, because as we talked about today, the desires, getting really, really clear-headed about what your desires are, making sure that you're not thinking you desire something and it's really somebody else's desire that you've adopted. Yep. There's so much psychology that goes into running a business for yourself. And I think therapy can be really, really helpful and often isn't talked about in the context of career and profession. But
love that.
Those are my nuggets.
Yay. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for
being here. Our first episode.
Inaugural episode.